we have here today Thomas, and I just wanted to make some basically some questions to Thomas. Maybe you can start to present yourself, okay, and tell you basically talk a little bit about your role at Microsoft and what you do for. Basically, we know everyone knows that you get all the cool swag from Microsoft and free surfaces and things, right? But
Yeah, I
you can
wish.
tell us.
I wish. Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me. I was really excited when I heard that Thiago was reaching out to me, and I was like, yep, of course I'm going to do that. If I have time, I always love to do things like this, and especially in these times, I think doing things like virtually is absolutely great, and I'm happy that the user group is so alive, and you're doing all these online events and online editions as well, because I think, again, from my experience, really in the last couple of weeks, people really appreciate it. So thank you very much for organizing it. So yeah, I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and people often say, okay, what does a cloud advocate actually do? So I joined, I think, almost a little bit over a year ago, February last year. I joined this group called the Cloud Advocates, and we are basically if you look at the high level, we are basically doing two parts, and we are part of the Azure engineering team. So we are not in the marketing organization, we are not in sales organization or anything like that. We are really part of the engineering team. And what our high level goal is like to create content and deliver content. That means like obviously like presentations, user groups, conferences. We also talk to customers, but also a lot of online content like videos and blogs and stuff like that. But also, like if you look at Microsoft Learn, if you know Microsoft Learn is this new free learning platform. Well, it's not that new anymore, but we're improving that. We're adding like Microsoft Learn TV. So those are all things we are working on as well. We also try to improve the documentation. So we like if there is something missing or if there's something we need to fix, we are looking at that as well. And also some parts we write some code as well. So we have people who actually like deploy small tools or create a little bit of like help for our customers. And that is also directly coming in with the second big task we are having is to talk to our customers and communities and gather their feedback to understand what is working, what is not working with our products, and then go to the specific feature teams to basically go out and fix that. Because as you know, as many of you know, usually when you're a customer and you're deploying something, you're not just interested in usually one Azure service. You're building on top of multiple Azure services. So the feature teams, they care mostly about their service, but we can basically go out and say, hey, like this more scenario based. So this scenario for the customer, we need to go to speak that person and this person, and they need to fix this together. So that is a high level what we are doing. Before that, I was a Microsoft MVP for a couple of years, focusing especially on virtualization, Hyper-V, but also System Center, private clouds, and then obviously Azure, and especially Azure Stack was one of my favorite products in the last couple of years. So I hope that was a little bit of an intro. What we're actually
that was
doing.
you already answered one of my questions that I had for you, because I was going to tell you about you were a former Microsoft MVP, and for example here we do a lot of events in terms for the community, and we try to scale up the community, and that's the purpose of today's, and also that's the purpose of the Azure user group that me and Virgilio started. We also have Pedro Souza there, both with videos turned on, because they are also organizers of the user group. And we also even have Sandro, but Sandro probably is grilling something or is in the pool. Okay. Nice. We're just saying this because it's the kind of pictures that he posts on Facebook. Okay. And Virgilio, you are muted, mate.
Or barbecuing.
So we have to teach Virgilio how to use a computer. It's not it's hard for him.
You have a sign with a microphone there in the middle.
Yeah, dude, I know.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, it was muted. So I was saying either that or his kid is taking a pic at his phone and eventually will call us at some point during our meeting.
That
like
happens.
his younger kid
with
actually calls us like at like 8 a.m. or 3 a.m. whenever he picks up the phone, boom, there's a call to us. On a big group.
You should say 20 or 30 calls, but who's counting?
Whatever. Okay, so another question for Thomas is that like we had Microsoft Build last week, right? And I saw that you were one of the speakers and you had some sessions there. And in terms of announcements, we had, like always, a flood, of announcements in terms of new features, new services. I loved finally to get the static and to be able to talk about the static web app. I was already using that for some time, and I was like, my God, I can finally start to talk about this because it is really cool. Okay, but what for you were the most, let's just say, at least for you, the bigger announcements for the community and for enterprises?
Yeah. As you said, I mean, there was so much announcements. There was so much going on. I mean, we knew about the stuff usually we get, but we get like huge lists and a lot of things which were like interesting, right? There was really this week, there was really a lot of things going on. I think if I would like start, like some of the tooling we got is definitely big, like the general availability of the Windows terminal, for example. That one made me really happy because I'm using it heavily. It's basically one of my daily tools. I think one which no one really expected was Winget, the Windows Package Manager. That one was really out of the blue for, I think, a lot of people. And then in the Azure part, I mean, as you said, Azure Static Web App was one of the really big announcements, which again makes a lot of people very excited. However, there were also many, many smaller things, right? Well, not necessarily smaller things, but not as like amplified as they usually are. So for me, very exciting was the news around what we had in our hybrid space in Azure, and what we are offering there, especially when it comes to Azure Stack. So we had a lot of announcements on Azure Stack, actually, with different services like the AKS resource provider preview, which is coming out, container registry preview on Azure Stack Hub, and so on, as well as the Azure Arc Kubernetes solution, which is also now available basically for people to try out in a public preview as well. So those were there. There are so many. Again, I feel already sorry for the ones I forgot.
Yeah, I loved also the one more on the data platform side, the Synapse workspaces. I think, I think that one is pretty cool, and also the Cosmos DB link with Synapse. Oh my God, those two features are like super cool because allow us to have basically like insights in real time and with a low effort, from our customers and from us to achieve that. The price tag, it's still there, but it's not cheap to run that. But still, the insights that you get from there, it is quite good. I don't know, for Julie, if you have something to add to that.
Yeah, actually, Thomas, following up on the build, have you started to notice like some more buzz around Azure Arc? Are you getting like have you noticed like swarming things, like people like, okay, now I want to do that, or this is like super cool? What is your feeling from the community side on the reactions of Azure Arc itself? Because it's like a major thing. It's a major change for a lot of people. And a lot of people are not actually expecting Microsoft to take such a blunt approach to things and say, okay, no, here it is. We make it out, regardless of the cloud, regardless of the provider. We don't care. Here's Azure Arc for your needs.
Yeah. No, the interest is huge. I mean, since we announced this, and it has been like really a great time for me to talk about this because everyone wants to know about it, right? And to be honest, the one thing I realize from talking about it very often is from people that, oh, that's great, but can I do this and this and this? And so people already want more, right? They already want, and that's usually a very good sign. It's sometimes a little bit like frustrating because we just brought this product out and it does many things which weren't there yet, but people already want more, which is absolutely great sign which we have there. And I think that reflects very much like this product or that service like Azure Arc reflects of kind of like what Jason Sanders said, and I think I have that in my presentation, what he said about where we think our customers are going, and that a lot of customers that we see, for them, hybrid is the end state, right? And it's not just an in-between state until everything is moved to the cloud. It's really, we see the need from the customers that they say, hey, I mean, I would love, some of them really would love to use cloud for everything, but they see that for some services, it just doesn't make sense, right? For several reasons. And so like meeting the customer where they are, I think that is a huge thing. And that is why we also have so much interest in this.
Okay, so I just have one last question before we start our presentation at 6:45, okay?
Yep.
It is, what do you see about the future for Azure? And I know it's a super hard question, okay? This is why I keep this one for last. Okay, what do you see the future like? Of course, it's hard to say for the next 5 or 10 years. For sure, I'm not going to ask you that. That will be I will be a very bad boy if I do that.
Yeah,
but like for the near future, okay?
Yeah, it's a very tough question, and I think there is like I can only share my own opinion on this, and not necessarily like what people like will see or where we are going. But I see us, first of all, becoming more and more open, right? When it comes to like platform, what are we having on our platform? What are we supporting? You can already see, and it's already an absolute open space, right? You know, like you all know that we are not just there and supporting it Windows and whatever. It's really about like being there for basically any developer, any IT pro, like giving them the best platform for in the future, right? For everything. Again, I think we are doing a really good job already. But I think we will extend that even further and go even further and pick up that where we belong. I also think that we're becoming much more, let's say, customer driven when it comes to certain products. Like let's say the like Power Apps, which we have and stuff like that, which is also part of the Azure world. I think that is going to make a big difference as well, because it enables like just no regular people who don't have experience in developing, right? Like me, I'm not a developer, but I can write a Power App basically and solve a real problem from my company, right? So I think that is another huge advantage. And then especially when it comes to obviously data, I think that is where we get really, really strong. Data analytics, machine learning, IoT. Those are all factors which obviously get a huge investment. But again, it's everywhere, right? I see just improving everywhere. And what I'm really happy about it is that we also, again, investing on where the customers are right now, right? We're not just thinking, okay, hey, we built this fancy product, which a couple of customers will jump on, but also like, hey, there are some IT challenges still going on, like especially like if you come to server management, container management, all of that, those things we still have and we will have for the next years, or maybe pretty sure decades. That is something we definitely going to address as well. So
I think it's a non-ending story, that one, okay? Because
yeah,
there is always updates to do, and there is always space for improvement for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we can get started. Okay, so now Thomas will basically do a presentation about Azure Arc. Okay, so maybe you can start whenever you want. Just share your screen and go ahead. And I will turn my camera off now, okay, so that I don't disturb the presentation.
Perfect. Okay, I will do that. So just let me know when it works. It's a little bit slow here.
It is working here. It's showing. Yep.
Yep.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So yeah, this presentation really is about Azure Arc and what we're actually doing with Azure Hybrid, right? I call the presentation, I call it hybrid, but that doesn't mean it's really focused on the Azure Arc piece, because as you will see, there's much, much more going on than just the things we have right now than Azure Arc. So making a step back from actually like looking at the products first and stuff like that, let's have a look at what we see, what happens in customer environments. And there are a couple of main challenges which we see, which tied into exactly what I just said. Well, like going out there, seeing what are the challenges for our people working in the IT space, and let's see how we can make this better. And what we actually see is that, like with all that cloud and all the new capabilities we have and all the new business demand, customer environments usually get more and more complex, right? They like, there is a lot of things to do if you today run in IT. And I think most of the people here in the call, you're all here to learn about this and exactly like learning about this complexity and how you actually can solve it. So one thing we see is that IT operations, IT administrators, or like also like just IT departments, they usually start to manage hundreds, if not thousands, of different applications. And some of these applications, those are really modern applications, like can be like containerized with modern languages. They can be serverless. They can, again, they run in containers. But obviously, you also have your traditional applications, and they run in virtual machines or even on physical machines. And you need to take care of these as well, because those are not going away anytime soon. So you need to manage all that kind of like applications around your environment. And then you also end up in having all that diverse infrastructure, right? Customers today, they probably have not just one data center, but maybe multiple data centers. They're using some service providers. They are looking at like branch offices they need to manage, stores, factories, where they have probably just servers or IoT devices, and they need to manage all of that. And it's not just about just having one data center and a rack anymore or something like that. It's really getting more and more complex, because we will have devices or just servers everywhere. And the last one I want to talk about is like multi-cloud. So we see also a lot of customers doing that, and even there are multiple reasons for this, right? So it's not just because they want to. There's also sometimes that a company decides to go with Microsoft Azure as their main cloud provider, which is, by the way, a fantastic choice. But there is also like maybe they started, like another department started already using cloud before they used Azure, and they're not going to just migrate now everything over to Azure just because, or they have now Azure. Or some companies say, hey, we have kind of like this strategy to basically run in multiple clouds, or we just prefer one service in another cloud provider. And so managing all this can be very, very difficult, right? And I think that is one of the challenges we see is, how do you manage all of that, right? Today we have probably some tools which we use on-prem. We have some tools in Azure. We have a couple of tools we use at other cloud providers. We use some tools maybe in some branch offices because we don't have the connectivity, the VPN set up and stuff like that. So that is really like a tough thing to do. And this is the slide I meant. This is a picture from Microsoft Ignite 2019. And this is Jason Sanders. He is the Azure engineering lead, if you will, for all the Azure services. He is directly under Scott Guthrie, and all the the teams who built the products are basically reporting to him. And he went in the keynote, and obviously we talked a lot about hybrid, and you can also see that on the slides on which I show here. But what the most important thing I think he said is really that we see hybrid as an end state for a lot of our customers, and not just an in-between state before they move everything to the cloud. I mean, if you think about it, you probably want to run, like if you have a factory, you probably don't want to depend on the internet connectivity, right? I mean, you can say, okay, the cloud like can be very reliable. My solution I build on top of it is very reliable, but the internet connectivity to that cloud, maybe not, right? So do you want really to stop the factory or like working when there's no internet? Probably not. Same thing for like hospitals and like your branch offices and a lot of different things you don't want to risk. So you will end up, and what I think we'll see a lot of obviously cloud adoption for the services which make sense, but then there are also services which make sense, which need to stay locally. And those can be, like, again, as I said, like networking reasons, but also compliance and regulatory reasons, where you probably just can't store data in Azure region because it's probably outside of your country or something like that, right? So those are many reasons why I think hybrid is definitely a key here. And the great thing about Azure, and I feel always bad when I talk about like this new thing and hybrid, it's not new. Like Azure was built up to be hybrid, right? We have these marketing stickers where they say born to be hybrid, and that's actually true, right? We have already many hybrid services in there. We're just doing a very bad job of talking about these. And so we have, for example, if you look at when we talk about hybrid, we also talk about Azure IoT. We're talking about our management suites and securities, like, for example, connecting security center, connecting backup, connecting monitoring, connecting Azure Sentinel, all this stuff, like, or DevOps scenarios, all that can be done in a hybrid fashion. And then we obviously have, and that's what a lot of people think, is we have Azure Stack, right? And Azure Stack is now a portfolio of product with Azure Stack Hub and Azure Stack HCI and Azure Stack Edge, which gives you basically infrastructure you can put in your location wherever you need it. And again, this will not be a presentation about Azure Stack or hybrid in general, but those are important parts of the story. And again, we have a lot of experience in hybrid. I mean, not just about the Azure services in general, but if you look at Windows Server, if you look at Active Directory, if you look at the networking pieces, if you look at databases, those all can be connected and basically take advantage of Azure hybrid services. Now, the big announcement we really had, and that's why I'm here to talk about, is Azure Arc, right? And Azure Arc is really a couple of things, basically, what it allows you to do. But if you need a single word for Azure Arc, it's basically running running and managing Azure services on any infrastructure, right? So enabling basically to run these Azure services as well as managing services from Azure. So I have another slide which does show that a little bit. So when we start on the bottom right, we have our IoT solutions, and then we obviously have our infrastructure solutions, if you will, with our Azure Stack portfolio. Again, it's not just a single product or service anymore. It's now like 3 different kinds of offerings we have there. And then one part on the left side you can see here is bringing Azure services to any infrastructure, and that is a part of Azure Arc. So Azure Arc data services, for example, allows you to deploy Azure SQL and Azure Postgres basically on the environment you want, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on, but you could actually deploy Azure SQL in your data center, and you can deploy Azure SQL probably at another cloud provider. And then the other piece of Azure Arc, that's the line in the middle. That's that single control plane that we get with Azure Arc, right? And that is what I will mostly talk about in this talk, is about that control plane, because I think that's the key element of Azure Arc really what the benefit is. And I think that is where we focus on. So again, what does it actually mean? What does meaning a single control plane actually mean? So you will hear me a lot talking about on-premises and on-prem, but that actually for us, hybrid doesn't mean just on-prem and Azure. It really means now on-prem, Azure, or multi-cloud environments, and also the edge, right? So all that is for us is hybrid. It's not just about just having on-prem and Azure. It's really about all these environments, all that together. Where we saw also our customers they have systems all over the place they need to manage. Now, a control plane we're going to use basically for a couple of different things right now. But again, there will be more and more coming, as you can imagine. But today it's really about the foundation. It's about organizing and govern your resources at scale. And I'm going to show you that in a quick demo, how that works. And then also basically using our DevOps practices we have, which we use in the cloud, that we can extend them to services or infrastructure running on-prem as well. And then obviously integrating security patterns, which we can leverage from Azure to basically extend that. But that is like really what we currently have, and I will talk a little bit about that and also show you a quick demo about it. So let me quickly switch my environment here. Perfect. So here I am in the Azure portal, and I hope every one of you has already seen it, and I'm not going to talk about too much about this, but what I'm actually going to talk about is the first part of govern and organizing your resources, right? So in Azure, one thing, if you started really early with Azure, where you still had the service management API, one thing you realize, you have a lot of resources in Azure and it's difficult to manage these. So then a couple of years back, we introduced basically the Azure Resource Manager. And that is basically I will talk a little bit about that in a bit, but that is basically the power behind this management is Azure Resource Manager. So what I can see here now is all my Azure resources. So you can see here, usually a resource is a type, like for example, a public IP address, network adapter, a virtual machine, a database, a disk. Those are all different types. And they are usually organized by a resource group and a location where they are placed in the Azure region, and they usually belong to a subscription. I can then use stuff like tagging as well. And again, this is nothing new. This is not related to like specifically to Arc. This is there for all the Azure services. Now our customer said, okay, hey, Azure Resource Manager is great. Like this really helps me organize my resources. So why not use this also for my resources which are running, which are not running in Azure? So for that, I want to quickly show you something. So I'm going to filter here, and I'm only want to see my Azure virtual machines as well as my machines joined by Azure Arc. So I already onboarded a couple of servers. I'm going to show you the example with servers to Azure. And so what I can do here, I can set a filter and basically say, hey, now I just see all my Azure VMs. You can see that here, but also my Azure Arc VMs. And if I use grouping, for example, I can use grouping by type. I can see here, hey, I've joined my on-prem server next to my Azure virtual machines. And you can see here I use tagging as I would do it for an Azure resource, right? These servers here, they are running actually in my data center locations, which is behind there on Intel Nuke. But don't tell anyone, because I tell them that they're running in a data center. However, again, these are not running in Azure. That's the point here. And so I can see, as you can see here, I use a location tag to mark the location. But I can also use tagging then for things like cost management. So what I did is, for example, I created a cost center tag. So what I can do here is I could go and use a filter. I can say, hey, show me all my machines from a specific cost center. And not just the machines which are running in Azure, but also the machines which are running on-prem. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm only going to select the cost center 1001. And if I do, then you can see here now, whoops, you can see here now that I can see my server running on-prem from that specific cost center, as well as the machine running in Azure. And now, again, this is great to organize your resources. You cannot just use the portal to do this. You can also use, obviously, PowerShell or the CLI or APIs or the Azure resource graph, for example, to basically keep track of that, build your dashboards and all of that, to basically organize your resources, right? And you will say, okay, Thomas, yeah, I mean, that's great, and it definitely helps us, but there must be more, right? And absolutely there is. So the next thing I want to show you is policy. So we have this thing called Azure Policy, and Azure Policy, for those who don't know, it really helps me to set certain rules for my Azure environment. So I can, for example, configure my Azure environment to keep control of that environment, but still give developers and like IT operations people direct access to the cloud, so they can deploy what they need, and then they can keep the speed and the agility the cloud promises, but still I keep the control. So I can set, for example, okay, you're only allowed to deploy in this specific Azure region. You can only use this size, this Azure VM type, for example. You can't deploy a large MV2 series VM with like 200 cores, 12 terabytes of memory, and drains your credit card in 3 seconds. You can actually block that, right? That's one part of Azure Policy. But the other part for Azure Policy is the Azure Guest Configuration policy. So that allows me to audit, for example, operating system settings. This can be Linux and Windows, and we use that for Azure virtual machines for quite a while, right? So we can basically go out and say, hey, our setup needs to be secure. So our VMs need to be configured in a secure fashion. And if they are not, I want to know which VM is not like configured in a secure way, for example. But there's much more you can do. You can also list like, is this application installed or not? You can really manage the operating system. That's the point. Now, to assign a policy like this, again, this is not specific to Azure Arc. This is really something we already had a long time for Azure VMs. So we can go and say, hey, I want to create a new assignment. And I'm not going into deep to that between the difference between initiative or policy, but basically an initiative is a collection of different policies. So I'm going to assign one of these. I can check a scope. So a scope can be on a management group level, on a subscription level, or on a resource group level if you want to, depending on what your needs are. And then I'm going to select the actual definition. Now, what you can see here, we already have some built-in definitions for you, which you just can use out of the box. And let me show you something. So there is one which basically goes out and audits VMs with insecure password settings. Well, basically it shows me, hey, which VMs are configured securely, and if not, what are the VMs which do not have the right policies in place, and which policies are those, and so I can go out and fix that. So instead of doing that now, I already did this. So let me go back here. I can have a look at compliance. So I go in here and you can see here all my assignments, and you can see here I have a couple of assignments which are green and compliant, and that's fine. That are the good ones. And then you can also see that I have a couple of them I'm not really compliant with. So I have, for example, 10 resources here which are not compliant with that specific policy. So I'm quickly having a look. And this is the policy I just mentioned, right? This is like going out to audit VMs for insecure password settings. And if I scroll down, you'll be able to see all the policies in that initiative. And then you can also say, hey, I want to see the non-compliant resources. So if I click on this, what you now can see, thanks to Azure Arc, you can now see your Windows VMs, your Azure VMs, which are in Azure. You can see the resource type, which are not compliant. But you can also see your servers running on-prem or at another cloud provider, which are not compliant with that policy. So these, for example, are running in my data center. We'll have a look at these in a bit. But so you can see here they are in the resource type Microsoft Hybrid Compute machine, which then actually gives you the information that this is actually a hybrid machine and not just Windows, an Azure VM. So with that, let me quickly switch back to my presentation here. I'm not going to show you the video recording. So how is that actually done? If you look at this is a very high-level architecture slide of Azure Management and the control plane. But let's make it very simple here. Let's start on the left side. So we, as an Azure customer, if we interact with Azure, we use certain different tools, right? Those can be the portal, this can be the CLI, it can be PowerShell, it can be APIs we use, and so on. But what we are actually doing is we are interacting with Azure Resource Manager I mentioned before. And Azure Resource Manager really brings all these goodies, basically these tools for like RBAC, subscriptions, logs, policies, blueprints, groups, tags, indexing, all of that. That is all done and provided by Azure Resource Manager. And then we have a couple of management services which build on top of that. And then we used Azure Resource Manager until we announced Azure Arc. We used it basically to manage Azure services, right? This was exclusive to run, again, for Azure services. So what we did with Azure Arc, we basically extended the Azure Resource Manager functionality so we can support resources which run outside of Azure, right? So you can see here we currently support servers. This can be, again, Linux and Windows servers. They can be physical or virtual, wherever they are running. Same thing for Kubernetes clusters. So we announced Kubernetes cluster support. So you can basically onboard your on-prem Kubernetes clusters or the ones running in Azure. They also support like things like OpenShift. And I think we had a great blog post where we like talked about the relationship with Red Hat and OpenShift and all that. And then the point I mentioned with Azure Data Services, where we actually bring down Azure SQL, and then you can still manage it from Azure. And so Azure Arc really is the bridge between these non-Azure services and Azure Resource Manager. And that is actually is what it brings together, right? So I want to give you another demo now. I mean, you say, okay, hey, Thomas, nice, I've seen now, but how do I actually work with Azure Arc? And so let me switch back to my demo environment. And I really hope the crowd here loves demos because the next pieces are going to be mostly demos. So if I want to start working with Azure Arc, what do I do? So obviously I go to the portal and I can go to Azure Arc. And if I go to Azure Arc, you can see here immediately that these are the free experiences we are offering today. Again, we're going to look at organizing and govern your servers. That's the one which is already in public preview, which you can try out today. Again, we are still obviously working as on all Azure services to improve that. And then we have also Kubernetes cluster management, which also gives you obviously the policy part, like with servers, but also integrates application management at scale. So for example, using a technology with GitOps, basically, so you can actually go out and deploy containers on a Kubernetes cluster on-prem or somewhere else by checking code into a Git repository again. This can also be a private or public repository, that doesn't matter, but you can configure that from Azure. And then the last one, again, mentioned it many times already, Azure Data Services. So to run Azure SQL, for example, on top of your Kubernetes cluster running on-prem. So what we're going to look at is really the server management part, because that's the one I can show you without violating any NDAs. So you can see here, I list already all my Arc machines joined to that specific subscription. And you can see here, those are all systems which are already onboarded. Now, people are probably asking, okay, how do I onboard a server like this? So it's very simple. What we have is actually we have an agent which we install on the operating system, again, Linux or Windows, which then connects up to Azure. It's an outgoing HTTPS connection to some Azure APIs. So there's no inbound rules you need to have, no VPN needed or anything for that. So if I want to add a server, and I'm going to show you quickly, quickly show you my environment here. So this is my local environment, which I'm running here. And I have a SQL server here. The SQL Server 01 here, that is one you can see here that this one is not yet onboarded, in Azure using Arc, right? So we're going to onboard that specific server. And what I'm going to do, I'm just simply clicking on Add. And you will see I get two experiences. One is the simple interactive script one. That's the one we're going to use. That basically helps me generate the script, which I then can run against a server, and then I need to log in and basically register it to Azure. So very simple to do, but obviously that's not a great idea if you want to onboard hundreds of servers to that. So you need to do that on scale. So we can also provide you with a solution which basically works with a service principal name, which has enough permissions to just onboard Azure VMs, to run onboard servers to Azure. But again, for the demo, we are just going to use this one here. And you can see here, this is a wizard which will help me generate that script. So it becomes very simple for me to basically do that. So the first thing I need to do is I will need to select a subscription, because every Azure resource or everything connected to Azure Resource Manager is basically in a subscription. It's in a resource group. So I'm going to select the resource group I already have here. It needs to be joined to a region. Again, we are currently in public preview, so we're limited on the regions, but you can expect that to change. But right now, I'm just going to select West Europe. I can then say, hey, do I need a script for a Windows machine or Linux machine? So in that case, it's a Windows machine. And I could also configure a proxy. So if my server is behind a proxy, I can obviously configure that as well. I can already use tags. So you saw that I was using tags. So I can also, when the resource joins, already assign that, it automatically has assigned certain tags. But you can always do that later. So I'm not going to do that right now. And at the end, basically, we have a download button, which we can download the script, or we can just have a look at it here. And you can see here that basically it's a simple three steps. One is downloading the agent. The other one is installing the agent. And then the last command really is registering that server to Azure. So what I'm going to do, I copy this and I'm going to my SQL Server. Again, I could also build some automation around this, but I want to show you what's actually is going to happen. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to paste this script here. So it's going to download the agent, this MSI file. And then it's going to install it. And when it's installed, the last thing we need to do is basically go out and register it. And that's the register command. So we're going to use that. And what happens now, it tells me that I have an error because I already onboarded that server before and I haven't disconnected yet. So sorry for that. This server is already registered. Because I was just doing another demo, so this one is already showing up. So let me go back. Hello, go back. Please let me go back. Okay. Come on. No, I don't want you. Yes, so sorry for that. So that would then mean that after I run this script and I would run the registration and login, what would happen is basically the server would show up here. But again, since I already registered, there's still some resource which I didn't clean up nicely. So however, anyway, we would now just see that server, and what I would do is I could now go to one of these resources. So this is also a server which runs behind me. And you can see here, this now has the look and feel like an Azure resource, right? It's joined to a resource group. It has a location. And you can see here we have an activity log, and we also have access control. So we have role-based access management. And this is something which is very important, especially when you deal with the hybrid services, right? We already saw that how I manage, for example, policies, right? But I don't want to give everyone access to the to see all the machines in my Azure environment. They should only see their Azure VMs or their Arc VMs, which they are actually allowed to see, right? So if you, for example, run SharePoint and you have some Arc VMs running the front-end servers and the SQL database servers, and the SharePoint admin is only allowed to manage these servers. So he should only obviously see that, and so you can configure that as well, and he doesn't see all the servers. Again, you can also see here I can use tags. I can also change this if I want to. So if I would go in here, I could basically add more tags to it, to the specific resources, which I then can use. I showed you policy. So what I'm going to show you here is, if I click on policy in here, I only see the policies which are assigned to that specific server. So if the policy is assigned to the subscription where that server is in, I can see it for that I'm basically assigned. It's also assigned to my server. And you can see here, okay, me now as a server admin, I can check, hey, okay, I'm compliant with most of the company's policies for my server, but there are a couple of them which I'm not compliant to, so I can go out and have a look at it. And this is the same one I showed you before. So as you could see, my server is not compliant with the secure password settings. So what I can do is, again, I can have a look at all the policies, and I can then look at, for example, okay, what it is actually, which setting is it I need to fix. And another great thing is, if you're familiar with policies, there are also remediation tasks. So instead of going and changing that by myself, I could now, as a server admin, say, hey, create a remediation task, and this will basically allow me to deploy this. So this is the policy part again, but there's also a log part, and you can imagine this is like, take this as an example of what's possible. We are currently working in adding more and more capabilities, but you can have a look at the idea of what is actually possible. So if you're dealing with logs, you were able to onboard Azure, like on-prem VMs to Azure Log Analytics. However, the problem you had was that, again, if you want to give someone access to these logs, you basically have them to give permissions to the Azure Log Analytics workspace. And then they would also see logs from other systems, right? And you don't want that. So the RBAC functionality also kicks in here. And so you can see here that the scope here is only my server. So I now have all these different logs, which I can then basically go out and run queries, but only for that specific server I have permissions. So here in the pane, I can do some queries, for example. So here I'm using the keyword query language, the one thing you're familiar with when you do like Azure Log Analytics or Sentinel or a lot of other things where we're using that. Some of you maybe remember the Custo query language as well. So those are is the thing we basically would run. So I have one which I'm using as a demo, which also gives you another idea of what's possible here. So I can run here, for example, the query to list updates on that specific server. So I now see here all the specific updates which are installed or needed on that specific system. So you can see here I have a couple of them which are installed. I can then also go and say, hey, what updates are actually needed for that system? And I could then basically go out and install these. Now, again, this is just one example how you can use log analytics, but there is obviously much, much more behind it. So that is about the Azure Arc for servers features right now. But again, if you compare it, I just give you a quick tip. So you have a couple of, if you go back to one of these, it looks like Azure Resource. And if you look at an Azure VM, you will also find menus like operations and monitoring there, but with much, much more options. So we are currently listening to our customers and trying to figure out, okay, what do they need? What do they want? What can we integrate into that? So just to give you a little bit more like a view a little bit in the future, if you will. Okay, so let me switch back to my slides here. Okay, perfect. And then again, not going to show you the recording. So that I showed you how you onboard the server. So let's talk a little bit about key takeaways we have here if we talk about Azure Arc for servers. Now, again, I didn't speak much about the Kubernetes part. Again, this is in private preview. However, at Build, we announced that you can actually now, using the CLI and commands, basically to onboard your clusters and try it out also in public preview. But let's keep it about the server right now. So as I mentioned, you basically can onboard and get an inventory of your Windows and Linux servers, physical and virtual machines running in your data center or another cloud provider, and they're completely domain agnostic, right? This helps you then also to basically build some governance and security built in. So think about in the built-in policies for Azure and Azure Arc for servers you can use with the security baselines and the compliance view. You can basically go out and then see immediately all your servers, wherever they're running. If they're running in Azure on-prem, wherever they're running, you can see if they're compliant with your company policies or not. And again, I made it now about passwords and security, but one example I also often show is like time zones, right? So you want to be probably configure that all your servers are set to a specific time zone, so they're all set to that. You can also, like Azure policy can also, Azure guest configuration policy can also do that for you. And then the big piece, again, this is like what I call like the foundational piece, is the role-based access control. So with that, you basically can assign owners only to specific machines. So in that case, for example, in terms of log analytics, they can only see the specific logs for that specific Arc server. And again, if you're a MSP, a managed service provider, you're probably familiar with Azure Lighthouse to manage multiple environments at scale. And Azure Arc also is available in Azure Lighthouse. So you can even extend this even further. And then obviously you get all the good stuff from like having that inventory, having tags to basically organize your resources and much, much more. So again, I showed you mostly about Azure Arc for servers, but I want to quickly highlight the use cases again, just to make sure that you have the full picture. And again, I talked a lot. I know I'm repeating myself here, but I just want to make sure that you're aware of this. So first of all, organizing and govern your environments. This can be, as I showed you, for servers, but also for Kubernetes clusters. So you can make sure that your Kubernetes clusters, wherever they're running, are also secure and configured the right way. You can set certain policies to basically make sure that like the ports are configured the right way and you have all these security policies in place. The other part is then, I mentioned that before, is the app management at scale. So again, you can use your DevOps techniques if you want to, and basically have that GitOps integration, where you then allow basically to deploy container or applications directly to your Kubernetes cluster running outside of Azure. And you configure that all using the Azure Arc solution. And then the last one, which I also mentioned a couple of times already, is the data services one. So with Azure Data Services, again, a lot of customers came to us and said, hey, we love Azure SQL, right? We would love to use that. We love the scaling feature. We love it that is on like a service and that we don't need to take care of upgrading and all that. But we have certain workloads we just can't move to Azure. Again, this can be networking requirements, can be legal requirements, regulations and compliance reasons and so on. And I said, okay, we would love to have Azure SQL and other data services in our data center. And that is exactly what we did with Azure Arc as well. So we are now able to deploy Azure SQL and Azure Postgres right now in the data center. However, that said, again, these are currently the two we announced. There are probably more to follow depending on customer requests. And now, since we are a technical group here, I also want to show that larger overview to basically close it off and explain a little bit more behind the scenes. As I mentioned, if we start again on the left side, we have the management experience, portal, CLI, SDK, APIs, PowerShell, and so on. And we interact with Azure using the resource manager, which we have all these powerful tools like RBAC and policy. Now, what we are doing, we're now moving to the bottom. Basically, the team created a Azure Arc Server RP, which also saw the hybrid resources. You could see that when I showed the policy. The resource provider, which then basically connects with an agent we deploy or you deploy on one of your on the server you want to connect, and then talks to the Azure Arc Server RP. So you can manage your server from the Azure Resource Manager. With Kubernetes, then we can basically go out and say, hey, we have the Azure Arc Kubernetes RP. And again, we also have an agent for Kubernetes. So we connect that and make that possible and integrate that into Azure Resource Manager. And then going a step further is then the Azure Arc Data RP. And this one then connects, obviously, the data services, which also have an agent, to Azure. Now, what this graphic also shows is how, for example, Azure Arc data services, what the requirements are for customers to run Azure data services in their data centers, they will need to have a Kubernetes cluster. So that's the requirement they have. That can also be obviously OpenShift. But that is how you deploy, for example, Azure data services on top of a Kubernetes cluster. So you could basically combine all of that. You don't necessarily need to join the Kubernetes cluster to Azure. You could just use the Kubernetes cluster to run the data services. That's also possible. But you get that picture here where you could basically connect all of that together. And I think the last part is also very important. This is like the local tools you have used so far, and those are not going away, right? We expect you still to use the local tools. Like if you're a server admin, you're going to use Windows Admin Center, Server Manager, PowerShell, whatever you use to manage your servers locally. Same thing for Kubernetes, the native tools you use for managing that. Whatever you prefer there. And then you obviously for Azure SQL, you're going to use Azure Data Studio, because we don't want to create that dependency between Azure and your local environment. The local environment should still run even if there's no connectivity between Azure and your local environment. And so you're still able to interact with it and work with it. However, Azure Arc gives you that extended management capabilities, and so you can combine them with your local only tools here. Good. So I want to come back to that slide because I want to also, usually I get a couple of questions which I can already probably answer before people ask for it. Again, Azure Arc alone is not the hybrid story we have, as well as Azure Stack is not alone the hybrid story we have. Again, we have much more, we're much broader. A lot of the management services like update management, change tracking, log analytics, backup, disaster recovery, security center, monitoring, and the list goes on, right? So we have a crazy number of services which already can do hybrid scenarios. Same thing for when you think about SQL Server, when you think about our DevOps tooling with Azure DevOps Server and so on. We really have that hybrid tooling in place. And Azure Arc really becomes that bridge between those services to Azure. And I've also important, like one question I always get at least once in the presentation is like, how does Azure Arc and Azure Stack work together? How do they relate? Is Azure Arc replacing Azure Stack, or why would I use one or the other? Now, as you can see, we talked now a lot about Azure Arc adding on-prem resources to Azure. And that is one of the use cases, but Azure Stack Hub, for example, or Azure Stack in general, those are addressing different kind of use cases, right? This is where you need, for example, Azure services without the connectivity to Azure to live in your environment, and you get that consistent experience with your own Azure Resource Manager in your data center, where you can also use ARM templates to just deploy online, to deploy on-prem, where you, for example, can then use it for because you don't have good internet connectivity or no internet connectivity at all, or for example, where you can have regulations where you just don't want to have, or you're not allowed to basically use Azure in some situations. Or one of the things where you also probably want to run an Azure Stack can be like, a lot of the IT departments are telling me, hey, we would love to use Azure, but we're not quite ready yet. So we want to keep it in our data center and run it under our terms. And that is also where Azure Stack Hub can come in. So my main point here is Azure Stack, the family, again, it's a product family or portfolio we have right now, and Azure Arc. Those are not like products against each other. They're not replacing each other. They can be completely separated, or they can even work together. So think about the scenario where you need some infrastructure, where you, for example, want to run containers. Let's just say you want to run containers, and we just announced at Build that the preview of the AKS, like the Azure Kubernetes Service resource provider, on Azure Stack Hub. So we have AKS in Azure, but now with that preview, we bring the AKS service basically to your Azure Stack Hub. And what you can do now at the end would be that you then connect that with Azure Arc. So we get like the best of both worlds, but you don't have to do that. You can also just run it isolated in your environment as well. So there's a lot of room where things can play together, but also solve different needs, right? And then also when I think about things like Azure Stack HCI, where we have our hyperconverged solution, where you can run VMs on top of it, for example, and then you can, for example, use Azure Arc to connect VMs running on top of Azure Stack HCI, for example, or also Kubernetes clusters running on top of Azure Stack HCI to Azure. So you get also, again, that combination as well. So again, a lot of interesting things happening here in the hybrid space. I really think that there is not one answer which fits all, but with Azure Arc, we're really closing that gap and allowing you to use the Azure Resource Manager and a lot of other these toolings, and then with that, a lot of other services with Azure. So with that, I know I'm a little bit short in time, but I guess we will have a couple of questions. And I want to say thank you already for listening to me for quite a while now.
Okay, that was great. I don't know if you have some questions.
Yeah, if you have any questions, just pop them up on the chat window and we'll read them out to Thomas.
I think you were just too clear, Thomas.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. Man.
Or else you just lost the audience totally. But we still have a few people.
It was very clear.
So.
Very clear.
As long as they're not asleep.
well, we don't know. Can you guys say something so that proves that you guys are not asleep? There you go.
We have a question.
We have some messages here.
Yeah.
Saying it was very clear.
Yeah, so Raphael is asking if there are any additional costs using Arc.
Yeah, so that's a very good question, because that is why I'm not talking about it, is because we haven't really talked about this yet. So we didn't really share about anything about pricing yet. Again, the products are still in preview. However, that said, right now, if you're using it right now, like let's talk about the server part. If you're using the server part right now, there's no additional cost right now to onboard service like this. As soon as you enable the lock feature, you will be paying for the log analytics traffic as it would be like as you would do with an Azure VM, or if you used log analytics on-prem before. So yeah, this is we didn't share anything on that. I expected it's latest at GA that we speak about it. My assumption, again, I have no idea, and when it comes to pricing, we have to be very, very careful if you're a Microsoft employee and talking about it. My assumption is that certain stuff will be free, but then you pay for the specific Azure services. And then there's also some stuff which we allow you to run something in your data center, which probably that would also mean some sort of cost, right, into that. But however, the interesting part, it will definitely be an Azure service, right? So it will be a pay-as-you-go model. It will offer all the benefits of that. So if you don't need it anymore, you just shut it down. I think that will definitely apply in my personal view, because again, there's no reason for us to like have an upfront fee or something like that. But again, take that with cautions. Again, we haven't talked about it, and then that was just my guessing here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have one other question from Marcus, which is more around whether Azure Arc has some way of like trying things offline inside client environment. So like the simulation thing, that's what probably Marcus is talking about. If you could like simulate, like what do we do with the ARM templates? I think that's probably what he's going towards, like seeing the result of applying everything.
Yeah. So today, again, we are like, unfortunately, the things I could show you are still a little bit limited because we already have more stuff, obviously, we were working on, or the team was working on. I would have loved to show this as well, but again, we're not there yet, what is coming there. But again, you can imagine that with like take the policies, for example, this is something where we can actually go out and apply something and then can see a certain reaction from that server, basically. And again, I have to be careful how I phrase things. That you can realize I'm like having my dancing shoes on here. But again, this is like, again, an opportunity also for you. So if you have feedback, what do you want to see? I mean, again, like the examples I always bring up is, for example, just to give you ideas, is update management, is backup, are these things you want to do from the Azure control plane? What else do you want to do? And what are the like priorities? For example, we also have customers, and these are not secrets, right? You can already today onboard a server to Azure Security Center, even if it's running outside of Azure, just not with the Azure Arc space. So is that something you want to see? Some integration between Azure Security Center and Azure Arc, Azure Automation and Azure Arc. Is there like, that is something I'm also happy to listen to you here in the chat, what you want to see. And again, if it comes later to you, always reach out to me on Twitter or on my webpage. I'm definitely happy to have your feedback, because that helps us to prioritize the features which we are working on.
Okay, so we have like one shout to you stating that like Sergey saying that he's going to shout about Arc on every single meetup.
Yeah,
so that you are aware
already.
And we have at least two more questions. So do we need a separate agent to onboard the Arc machines to log analytics, or does that come up during the installation? Yeah, maybe go with that one and I'll get you the other one next.
Yeah. So this is actually a very good question, because there's someone who knows what he's talking about as well. Yes, or who has used log analytics, right, with their on-prem machines. Today, the Azure Arc agent is a completely new agent. The reason for that is really, I think I mentioned that at the beginning, to enable these extensions which we have. So imagine in every Azure VM, we have a guest agent. Like you're probably all familiar. We also don't hide that. That's not a secret. There is an agent running inside the VMs you deploy in Azure, and that basically allows us to use features like you see on the menu to, for example, do password resets, to configure backups, and all of that. Now, the monitoring agent, which was available or is available today for on-prem environments, is completely different, right? It's something like separated to that, doesn't really have much in common with that. So the Azure Arc agent, that Azure Connected agent, that is actually kind of like rebuilding the consistent APIs we have with that guest agent in Azure. So we make it easier, or the team makes it easier with that agent for other Azure services to be onboarded. So that was a complete rewrite. That's a completely new agent. So you still need, for the log part currently, you need the MMA agent as well. I know that people obviously want to have less agents. The team knows that as well, but we will check how that will work out. Right now, this is a new agent, but it will bring you more capabilities than you have seen right now.
Okay, so I hope that Isaac, that answers your question. So, and sorry if I spelled your name wrong. So we have one other question from Joe. Is the Arc agent extensible? Will it be possible to trigger it to execute a task or pull stats on an app stack?
I have to be very careful. I would love to not comment on this, but with saying that, I probably already gave a comment on that. You can imagine, again, I think we mentioned this on the description page of Azure Arc. We provide a consistent extension experience with the guest agent running in Azure. And the guest agent in Azure is basically extensible to do certain tasks. So, yeah.
Yeah, I knew that was like a tricky question, but yeah, come on, we have to reply, right? So
absolutely fine. To be honest, ask the questions. If I can answer them, I will, and if not, I will just again, I have to be careful. I wish I could say more right now. I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah. So Sergey was also giving a piece of feedback, stating that there are already like a lot of workloads that do prove that Azure Automation in Azure Monitor plus the ARM, so plus the Azure Resource Manager, are well tested and well known. So it would be good if there was like a POC that would show up Azure Arc, Azure Policy, Azure Monitor, and Azure Automation for managing the hybrid infrastructure.
Yeah.
So it's a piece of feedback.
Yeah. No, that's actually a very good one. I mean, I really see what he is mentioning is kind of like goes in that exactly in that hybrid vision, right? So that's definitely definitely right. I can also mention that, I mean, if you look at the documentation which is out there, so we have documentation for the server part, and if you read it, it's very open, like how things work. So you will see that you basically, if you install the agent, you will have two new services on your machine. One will be the Azure Hybrid Instance Metadata Service, and the other one is called the Guest Configuration Service, also DSC Service. That's the name of it. So you can imagine that there is a certain technology behind it, which we already know from other parts.
Okay, so let's check if there are any more questions. We are like kind of wrapping up, but I think we don't have any more.
Yeah, I think we are all good.
Yeah, like Thomas mentioned, like in case you find like any other doubts, any other questions, that reach out, shout at him on Twitter or even to us, and we'll get the questions to him and get the answers back to you guys.